Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Kep, co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. Welcome to today's webinar. We're excited about this topic, looking at the future of the new hybrid workplace. But before we get started, I want to share something special we have for today's attendees. One of our monthly virtual conferences is coming up on Wednesday, November 17th, and it's titled Building a Skilled Team, How Upskilling, Coaching, and Recognition Can Help. It's going to be particularly valuable for employers who are looking for creative ways to attract top talent and keep them engaged. Thanks to our partners, including today's knowledge partner, we have some complimentary VIP tickets available for those who have joined today's webinar. That would be you. I'm putting a link in the chat space right now. You'll want to take advantage of this one because the regular price of our conference tickets is $149, and this link will give you a free VIP ticket for the whole day's activities. Today, we'll be exploring the topic, how to manage the perils and promise of the new hybrid workplace. As companies develop their plans for the transformation of the workplace, they'll need to mitigate risks as well as seize opportunities. Among the dangers, erosion of organizational culture, declining productivity, and inability to experiment and iterate. Yet three broad areas of opportunity present themselves as well: to find deeper meaning in work, put the workforce first, and to make the workplace a vehicle for your people and values. Bill Schaninger, a senior partner at McKinsey Company who advises leaders on the large-scale organizational and cultural change, will illuminate ways that business leaders can navigate this new terrain. He'll be interviewed by Bryan Walsh, the future correspondent for Axios. Our knowledge partner today is McKinsey Company. McKinsey helps organizations across the private, public, and social sectors create change that matters. Now, just a few quick logistical items before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand soon after the event, so you can look out for an email in about 24 hours with the link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from both the Society of Human Resource Management and the HR Certification Institute. You can also look out for a written account of the conversation on our website at fromdayone.co. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Bryan Walsh. He's the future correspondent for Axios, who covers emerging tech and future trends. He also produces a prescient newsletter called Axios Future, which you can sign up for on the Axios site. And he's the author of a book on existential risk called End Times. And yes, he does have a chapter on pandemics. Okay, Bryan, over to you and Bill.
All right, thank you, Steve, so much. And thank you, Bill, for being here virtually. I guess, we're here to talk about the perils and the promises of the new hybrid workplace. Let's start maybe with the perils. When you look out over the landscape of where work is now at this moment, that's sort of hopefully getting towards end stage pandemic, but clearly I'm still working at home. I think you're still working at home either. We're still in this hybrid environment. What is it that companies, and especially I guess HR managers need to really be aware of the risks that are coming with the way things are settling out right now and where they might be going to?
Well, hey, good afternoon, and thanks for putting this on. Look, it's the right question. I mean, I think so many of us, when the vaccines first came out, almost had a little bit of like the last 2 miles in a marathon, like adrenaline lift. We're going to get there, we're close, we're going to get there, and magically it's all going to be done. Well, I mean, when I guess I got my second vaccine shot in April or something, right? And we're still here. In fact, I'm signing up now for the booster. So we're still here, and it's maybe for some it feels like purgatory. Because it's not exactly sure, what are we doing here? We had a bit of false starts of, we're going to try to come back in the July 4th. We'll try to come back, when school starts. Many now have gone and said, we're not even going to take this on until January. And certainly Delta and then whatever subsequent variants come online have brought that about. The slowing of the vaccination rate, mandates have ebbed some of that, whatever. But there's still a fair bit of dynamism and uncertainty about when will it feel safe? Just from a straight public health standpoint. So that's one that's making it more challenging. So you take that as a given and say, okay, we're not going to have this solved anytime soon. Then you do have to start saying, well, what does that mean? Will we ever get to it? Well, maybe this is the new normal, right? Maybe this mix and uncertainty. In which case, organizations have some pretty stiff challenges. I mean, one of them for sure is segmenting the workforce to the extent to which you have workers who have to go to work. So the classic people have to go to the work versus work to the people. Well, they've not had a break. They've not had time at home. They've not had all the things that we've written about and talked about, compression of roles, et cetera. They've not had any of that. What they probably had is an unbelievable amount of pressure, likely real concerns about safety in the workplace,
Mhm.
likely significant turnover in the people working around them, and maybe some rather rushed approaches to how work will get done.
Mhm.
So for those who are still going to work, you likely have a rather significant buildup of burnout, anxiety, safety concerns, and likely significant attrition,
Mhm.
no doubt, which in many cases, I think people have tried to throw money at it. And I'm not certain that's directly answering the problem. It's probably a table stakes, be in the ballpark. We probably have some real concerns about how it is we're managing the work done in those workplaces. If you
Mhm.
think about the run-in now to the next holiday season and the tenuous nature of our supply chain,
Mhm.
there's some very real pressures. I mean, the underbelly of the consumption economy, and we consume things. That means we need things to consume. That
Mhm.
means things have to be made and brought along. And boy, have we discovered there's a very thin safety margin there. It's as if any idea of bumper stock went away, right?
Right.
So there's that, and so the whole thing underneath it very tenuous. The portion of the workforce that we've talked the most about, those that went home to work, well, they've had the prolonged sense of mom or dad, but often mom,
Mhm.
teacher, caregiver to an elder person, trying to be a partner of some sorts, and oh, by the way, still trying to be an employee.
Mhm.
In the early days, I think everyone was surprised by just how much we could get done,
Right.
right? And just remarkable. Then after maybe 3 months, people said, 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. may not be the best way to go here for prolonged
Mhm.
periods of Zooming, right? Then you started trying to see some clawback. But I think what we're seeing now is that after, what are we closing in on, 18 months, I guess,
Mhm.
it's a terrible environment to onboard employees,
Right.
right? So those that were there before had a social network, had a language that makes sense, had a shorthand. They knew how to navigate around the operating model to
Mhm.
get things done. You were a moment away from picking up a phone or texting and going, hey, how are we doing this?
Mhm.
Anybody joining into that has no idea what the rules are. I mean, show me someone who says, oh, our onboarding was made for people to do virtually. And I'll say, well, you're the unicorn. Most were just not made that way, right?
Mhm.
And so now we're fraying at the tie that binds. We're slowly seeing people going, you know what, we just need to get together outside just to have a beer, to have a meal. And
Mhm.
so there's this weird confluence of tired, wanting to be safe, being anxious about it, and figuring out, I actually kind of like the people I work with and I'd like to see them a little bit.
Mhm.
And that tumult, I think, is very, very much still there.
Mhm. So, one thing people are very worried about, I know, is this idea of a great resignation, a great attrition rate happening among workers. First off, I mean, are we actually seeing that? Is that real? And then if so, well, what can you do about it? I mean, that seems like a really primary question for anyone who's a manager right now.
It is 100% real, for
Mhm.
sure. I mean, multiple sources. We came in at, 40 some percent saying it was going to happen. I think, let me just, it was fast. The numbers seem to run 20 to 60 with the bulk in and around 40s.
Mhm.
And saying the likelihood that are planning to leave. So we do know real recorded uptick in quits at the same time as a dramatic downturn in furloughs and layoffs and things like that.
Mhm.
So already
Mhm.
had tightening. That's exacerbated by an all-time record number of new business starts last year.
Right.
So people even going to do that. And then a rather curious situation where there are a lot of people who are quitting, and which means they're not getting unemployment benefits,
Mhm.
and they're just quitting. There is
Right.
no job. There's not another job they're going to.
Mhm.
And that, I think, has really caught people by surprise.
Mhm.
The idea people are just saying, time out, I'm done.
Right.
I'm taking a break. And so I think there's a couple dynamics going on for sure, but one of them is there's now a significant portion of the workforce under 35 who have either delayed marriage and or delayed having a kid.
Mhm.
And with those two things absent, you don't have the proverbial other mouth to feed, in
Yes.
which case people feel real degrees of freedom to go, yeah, I'm taking a break.
Mhm.
We'll figure it
Mhm.
out. And so they've opted out. And I think that has so fundamentally shaken the sense of the power dynamic between employers and employees.
Mhm.
I think many of them are really caught off guard. And then their first instinct, of course, was to throw money at it.
Right.
Right. And then when you look at a lot of people going, no, 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 it's not actually about money. I
Mhm.
may go take money somewhere else because you're that miserable at running the organization. But
Mhm.
most of this has to do with I'm leaving you, right? I'm leaving you, the employer. And because it's not enough purpose, it doesn't matter enough. My boss actually is a jerk. I don't get to really enjoy my teammates, whatever. That kind of environment where it is fundamentally about the exchange, the nature of work. And I think people are saying,
Mhm.
it has to be more than this. I think that's really caught some people by surprise.
Mhm. So what can you do about that? Because I mean, if, as you've noted, if just raising the pay is not really going to be doing, because that's not so much the question here. As you noted, maybe these are people who don't have that same sort of financial burden because maybe they're not married, they don't have kids. You're also in a position, as you noted, where we're still going to be in this kind of hybrid situation for a little while. I think it's fair to say, possibly even longer. What sort of tools does that leave you as a manager to try to keep those people here? If it's not going to be pay, can't change the working environment, what does that leave you actually?
Well, I mean, the good news is it leaves you with quite a bit,
Mhm.
right? I mean, because a lot of the things that we're talking about are behavioral,
Right.
you got or small group cultural. Um, One thing about pay, because I'm certain many of the people watching us or listening will say, well, I just see prices, hourly
Mhm.
rates going up all around
Mhm.
us.
Mhm.
In certain sectors, fast food, restaurants, bars,
Mhm.
places, let's say, relatively low skilled labor,
Right.
that's just getting it into the fighting level. Like you're even at par with something. And then
Mhm.
it comes back to, do I really want to do this? Does it intrigue me at all?
Mhm.
But for employers now, let's just say you're safe. People aren't getting hurt when they go there, and the pay is good enough.
Mhm.
Then I think you're faced with, well, what do you have on offer? What is the classic value proposition? Do you
Mhm.
do something that helps people? Do you do something that's critical? Almost every job, well positioned, you can show how it fills something that somebody wants.
Mhm.
We help protect your money. We help set you up for retirement. We ensure you have access to healthy food. We
Mhm.
educate your children while you're off at work. I mean, fill in the blank. You ought to be able to show how it does something. What's the purpose of this thing? But so many organizations have made that to be more like a platitude on a poster on the bathroom wall,
Mhm.
not really lived every day, right? So one of it is, can you show people how what you're asking them to do fits in? How does it matter?
Mhm.
Then I would say second, and probably second on this list, is does the person you immediately work for, are they okay as a person?
Mhm.
Are they pernicious? Are they a jerk? Are
Mhm.
they prone to outrage? Or do they treat you as chattel, not as a person?
Mhm.
The basic nature of well, that's my boss. In fact, I had a run with a colleague recently on being a better boss, right? Which it surprised me how much uptake it had because I thought, surely we solved this like 30 years ago with some
You
good
think
IO
so, but
psychology.
probably not
Not
actually.
so much. No, right? So some of this is just how many people have allowed their bosses just to not be very good
Mhm.
and not very good on the human level.
Mhm.
And so there's clearly, a leaving that. Then the teams you put people in, are they actually inclusive? And I
Mhm.
don't mean kumbaya inclusive. I
Mhm.
mean like being thoughtful about the people who are trying to do the work together. This has
Mhm.
been exacerbated for sure by people who work apart,
Right.
for sure,
Mhm.
right? In terms of lining things up and again, and real questions about a return to the workplace on what level do you accommodate individual team, or organization and trying to match that to the work. That's still out there, and I don't think we have a good handle on that yet.
Mhm.
So for a
Is
lot of people,
oh, go ahead, sorry.
go ahead.
Mhm. I was gonna say, you
But
said the team. It's a
so
team like
purpose,
you.
boss, and team, and those three
Mhm.
orders.
Mhm.
Why am I doing it? Who do I work for? Who do I work with? That at
Right.
least gets you a start,
Okay.
right?
Mhm. So talking about team, is team kind of the atomic unit where it's like, oh, that's what you can affect. That's what you can, because it's, you can't changing an entire company. That's challenging, especially if you're talking about a larger one. But the team is the person that's the unit that, an employee will have the most interface with. Is that what you should really be focusing your efforts on when it comes to, if I can make it that work, if I can make it that feel like a welcoming place, even if it is virtual or hybrid, that's likely to be successful in keeping the people I want to keep.
I think so.
Mhm.
I mean, if you think about something being proximal versus distal, it is the small fighting group, right? The small
Mhm.
group that you work with.
Mhm.
And this dovetails, like we were just saying, with a return to the workplace. Well, what's the level of coordination? Some work that's just individual contribution. Well, you let them do it where they want to do it. But
Yeah.
if you have to do
Mhm.
it with other people, then you should be coordinating at the appropriate level. So it's
Mhm.
not employees just choosing on their own. It probably doesn't have to be the company choosing for you.
Mhm.
It's dialing in on the work that needs to be done. That means the people you work with, that team, need to be reasonably productive. And part of a
Mhm.
productive team is something that says they care about me more than my output.
Mhm.
They listen to my opinion, right? We're considerate of each other. We help each other.
Mhm.
And that when that phrase, particularly if you had significant turnover in the group and no real time to build the tie that binds, so it becomes
Right.
almost completely transactional.
Mhm.
It's like the well-honed team versus the all-star team.
Mhm.
The all-star team, while wonderful, doesn't know how to play together as a team.
Right.
And it's that sort of dynamic. You do have to invest in
Mhm.
team functioning, to
Mhm.
make it work.
Mhm. Well, how do you, I mean, how do you do that, especially again in the hybrid environment? Because, that's where your touch points are going to be somewhat more limited. Is it a matter of, I need to make sure I'm doing one-on-ones with people on a regular basis to ensure they feel that way? But yeah, I mean, like so much of what we used to do in the office was almost by osmosis. You just sort of created togetherness because you were together. That's not going to be the case for now. So how can you specifically coach people to do it in a way, even in that hybrid environment?
Well, for sure, we don't have the glancing blow meeting at the coffee pot, huh?
Right. The stuff, yes, the old water fountain and so forth. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think two things. One, you probably have to be more purposeful about the things you were describing as by osmosis than maybe we've ever had to think about before.
Mhm.
Simple things like, what's the ways that we think about timeliness?
Mhm.
If someone sends you an email, is that like an immediate thing? Is
Oh,
it a
right.
couple hour thing?
Mhm.
Is it acknowledge receipt of it, or do you give them 24 hours? Like
Mhm.
simple
Mhm.
rules of the road about how we treat each other. If I text you, it probably means it's pretty important.
Right.
We're not going to email each other out of hours, or we will do it out of hours and just for you to pick up in the morning. Simple things that
Mhm.
grease the skids for the exceptions. I need your help. I don't need your help. How do I get it? Right? Where can I go to figure things out? And then simple behavior, simple helping behaviors,
Mhm.
particularly when there's a real difference in tenure for the people who've been around a while helping the youngsters, that builds goodwill. In
Mhm.
almost all cases, the building goodwill part is the thing that matters. Because, like the old school trust equation, without going to
Right.
psychobabble,
Mhm.
one is credibility. I think you can do your job. Reliability, you do what you say you're going to do. And then intimacy, I
Mhm.
broadly know that we know each other. I can reasonably predict how you're going to behave. All of those, more is better. And
Mhm.
it's undermined by self orientation. Are you out for you, or are you out for we?
Mhm.
Well, when people are new into a group, there's a paucity of almost all of that. So you're not operating from a place of trust, you're operating from a place of transaction.
Mhm.
And so that's why you almost have to artificially create these opportunities for helping and learning, and just maybe even agreeing, hey, here's about like when we get to start. How does this work for you? Do you have anything going on in your home life? Just that kind of stuff, right? So it may feel more forced
Mhm.
than you would otherwise because a quick 3-minute conversation at the office now has to be replaced by a purposeful interaction.
Right. Alongside doing that, though, I mean, how do you ensure people don't end up feeling over meeting? I suppose because that definitely felt like something was happening, especially in the early stages of the pandemic, because we suddenly lost that touch point. So I have to schedule. That
Sure.
seems like a recipe for burnout over the long term. So I imagine there's sort of a happy medium you're kind of look to strike here, where you give people time to actually work, but you also
Yeah.
don't sort of lose them to the ether of the hybrid world.
You know what's funny? Before pandemic, I used to say to people, hey, instead of having a call,
Mhm.
if it's a Friday morning catch up, let's FaceTime over coffee or something else, because that was novel. Now it's probably alternative, which is why don't we just agree some hours where you don't need to turn the camera on?
Mhm. Okay.
Simple things.
Mhm.
Minimize the all hands. Try to encourage the glancing blows. I mean, I used to think that a simple little quick reach for the button, click on the person, their video comes up on this corner going, hey, what do you think about this? Okay, great, got it. Click, back.
Mhm.
So you want to be purposeful. Not everything needs to be super planned.
Mhm.
There is just something about the intimacy of what you would have gotten shouting from one office to another or leaning over the cube
Mhm.
or walking down the
Totally.
hallway. The glancing blow stuff, you need to find a way to have that.
Mhm. Mhm. We all this is a lot of it sort of circulating or orbiting around return to office. That's going to be an enormous decision for companies. It's going to have an enormous impact on workers. What's as we do figure out, okay, let's say we get to a safe period of time. What's the best way to manage that in a way, knowing that different employees are going to want different things? You can't satisfy everyone. So how do you create a return that is as inclusive as possible, that generates the best feelings and doesn't risk alienating people, which I think is a real risk.
Oh, 100% for sure. And you may just get to where you recognize that for some people, a return of any sort is not going to work for them,
Mhm.
right? I think you have to
Right.
accept that that's some cases. You should also accept that there are probably a lot of people who are really thirsty for a return
Mhm.
because work was a significant portion of their social construct,
Mhm.
right? Where is that? So, I feel like over the last 3 months now, I've probably intervened on getting more memos not sent out than I
Mhm.
have memos written. And a good portion of that was so many of them, because we put out something in the beginning of the summer said, employees are just desperate for you to tell them something.
Mhm.
Just what's the plan look like? Unfortunately, that tended to err towards rules. You will be
Right.
back 3 days a week. It will be these days. You get to pick the other one.
Mhm.
And my guidance to them was, well, why those days? If anyone's even looking for any kind of like guidance, why those?
Mhm.
Right? And so some of it is, why don't we just state what the intent is?
Mhm.
First, we care about your life, then we do the livelihoods. So we want you to be safe. Second,
Mhm.
we recognize that if school and daycare is in flux, all bets are off.
Right.
Right? As an example.
Mhm.
We'd like you to focus on the work that's just done by you. We don't need you driving in to
Mhm.
go to your office and go on Zoom.
Mhm.
But we do want you to coordinate when work has to be done at a different level, right?
Mhm.
We think it's
Mhm.
probably okay to say maybe a day a month is for the company and 2 days a month are for the unit,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
sort of stuff, right?
Right.
The idea where you can at least give some broad guidance and then push it as low down as you can for the
Mhm.
coordination to get a sense and acknowledging that if you want to get together on the company's dime, that's probably okay.
Mhm.
Right? Just
Right.
allow them to get together when they want to. And so that you're laying out at least a lattice, a way to think about it, right?
Mhm.
And not just coming with the rule. I really worry that after 18 months of showing you can do the job remotely, saying things like it's a return to work, kind of
What
offensive.
have we been doing for 18 months is the question I
Like,
would have
what
if
do
told
you
that.
think
Yeah.
we were doing, right?
Mhm.
Or just coming out with a rule right out of the gate saying you will do this, or calling it a perk.
Mhm.
What's the perk? The last 18 months was thank you for your flexibility.
Right.
So
Exactly.
it's weird almost trying to resort to what the old power dynamic was,
Mhm.
which is we're going
Mhm.
to tell you. And the proverbial horse has left the barn. That's just done. It's not,
Mhm.
and I worry a little bit, both from an inclusivity standpoint and let's say a segment standpoint, that let's call it in many cases what it is. There's a
Mhm.
bunch of old dudes that are in the last decade of their being in charge,
Mhm.
and their identity is tied up in being in charge. And they come out of their office and they have a sea of cubes, and
Mhm.
those cubes should be filled with people beavering away, and that's their domain, their team, their unit, and that is empty.
Mhm.
And they walk out and they're like, well, how do I know they're working? I can't see them working. I used
Mhm.
to be able to walk around and kind of poke my nose in and see what's going on. I don't have any of that now. So their own identity and their own experience, they're feeling lost. I'm having a little bit of fun with them, but also
Mhm.
it's their experience too.
Well, yeah, I mean, what do you tell them? I mean, like those guys, and it is mostly guys, I imagine. I mean, they need to make
Yep,
an adjustment themselves, how they feel,
100%.
they feel fulfilled.
What the interesting thing is about, sort of the, let's say, later in life folks,
Mhm.
particularly in the Western European and North American context, they've likely always had someone who took care of their kids,
Sure.
right,
Mhm.
at home. So they could free either they did the expat move or they really focused on work move.
Right.
So this is also a real challenge because they have a hard time reconciling any of this, right? It just feels like it's been a loss, it's been a chain of them, but what the hell are they doing?
Mhm.
And that their own side. And so, I've been saying, hey, why don't you try to find a way to start out with, let's get together, remind ourselves that we
Okay.
actually enjoy each other. Like a colleague had his delayed 50th birthday party a couple weeks ago.
Mhm.
And so we went there and it was super safe. Everybody tested up, had the results, whatever, but we got there.
Mhm.
And there was a bunch of McKinsey people there. And I was walking out saying to my partner, I almost forgot how much I enjoy these people.
Mhm.
It was just so pleasant.
Mhm.
And whether it's like team room time, whether it was like dinners after the day, whatever, like that, for many organizations, that's the fuel.
Right.
And I don't think the leaders are any different from anybody else in wanting that.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
they're
Mhm.
likely quite thirsty for it. It's
Mhm.
just the use of power as the dynamic to bring that back, as opposed to
Right.
humility.
Mhm.
I think it's a big miss.
Mhm. Does that sort of underscore the importance of whether you want to call them corporate retreats or offsites, whatever? I mean, since like that regular sort of office experience is not going to be there, okay, how much can we get out of a well-designed, let's all get together in a retreat or offsite sort of experience and hope that that can build up professional and social capital that will then carry us over till, the next one possibly.
It would not surprise me if
Hmm.
you saw a rather robust return to to corporate outings.
All
That's
right.
for sure.
Trust games and all. Yeah.
Yeah, welcome back, Trustful.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think we'll get something. I mean, just think about youngsters for a second, completely other end of the spectrum. So, you know, people who signed up for professional services largely expect to be on the road a lot.
Mhm.
You're likely traveling on someone's dime. You're likely getting an intense amount of apprenticeship and mentorship live.
Right.
Probably staying in a pretty good place. You're probably racking up a lot of frequent flyer and travel miles.
Sure.
And it's happening.
Mhm.
You move and
Mhm.
you feel like you're learning every day, and it's kind of fun. Instead, you've been in some dumpy studio, about 600 square foot, in
Mhm.
some Zooms from 8 to 10 every night, getting crushed. You're not getting any of those things. I mean, we have got to reboot and rethink about what's on offer when travel was a big part of what was on offer.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing, in addition to sort of building up that sort of social and professional capital, is that ideally that kind of experience can lead to, oh, here's a new idea, let's experiment. I mean, this is something people have been asking in the chat, actually. It's not just getting the work done, but, how do you do something new? How do you iterate? How do you experiment? Again, in this kind of format, without that.
Yeah. Well, so some experiments are forced on you, right? I mean, for sure. I mean, I've just started seeing clients again. I do not have the team traveling. I'm going to like meet a board or meet a top team or something else. But many clients are going, hey, you're actually really good on video. We're going to keep you on video.
Okay.
Just stay there. Because, in the earliest days of the pandemic, people who do what we do, we were like, everyone convinced we were super spreaders, because of how much we were in airports and traveling. I'm like, well, I'm not sure I like that characterization, but okay. So many of our clients haven't yet gotten clear on, well, when they're reopening. So we've had to be more thoughtful, maybe an offsite, maybe in a way, privately meeting with a client for dinner or something else. I think the old playbook has to come back out and go, what's the full range of things we can do?
Okay.
Hosting somebody on a golf outing, like how can we do the things that are kind of less dangerous, like be outside or something else, but still see people? There is no doubt that we've come to grips with, for many people, the human interaction part of work is just a big deal. Otherwise, it's just a task.
Actually, one question is someone who, obviously who you spent a lot of time in your work before this on the road. I think we can all agree that even after the pandemic is no longer really a concern, remote work will be much higher than it was pre-pandemic. I mean, just in terms of commuting to the office. However, I'm curious about your thoughts just about business travel, period. I mean, I could see a future where we're not commuting anywhere near as much, but we actually do travel for business a fair amount because we recognize the importance of that face-to-face for those special circumstances, whether it's a conference, whether it's a client meeting, something like that.
I think we will have a rather significant return of some of our travel, not all of our travel. I mean, if I think about what I accepted as a given, probably a third of the travel I did was kind of dumb. It was like too short a meeting for too long a time of travel that I can just do now by video. To go spend a day with teams, spend a day with clients, get there, see that's still high value, and I do it again in a heartbeat.
Okay. So, we talked a lot about the risks here, but what's the sort of upside, the positive side here? And we can also start with that whole Great Resignation idea. I mean, look, if there's a lot of workers quitting, then potentially there are a lot of workers out there who could potentially be hired, who maybe not were available before. How do you take advantage of that, that attraction? I think that you had a blog post that sort of had that, the great attraction, the great attrition. How do you make sure your company is attractive rather than one that's losing people?
Yeah, those words put together are really fun, huh? The number of times I've gobbled it all up and say, oh, gaga, we'll just do that. Your stance on it is really interesting. You can have a defensive stance and say, well, we have to go into retention mode or, prevent it. I always just felt like, well, if you're doing that, then you're always on the defense, right? You're thinking about what do you respond to, and why not just be a little bit more proactive and say, we're going to re-recruit everybody we got. We're going to double down on articulating our purpose. We're going to double down on getting really clear on what's on offer from an employee experience standpoint. We're going to take visible and symbolic steps on not tolerating jerks, right? We're going to make sure we're at par, but not try to buy in a mercenary workforce. I think all those things allow you to put your best foot forward. So I would do that for sure. Then I would also view it from a competitive lens of pay attention, to Vault, to Indeed, to Glassdoor, and all the places where the social community is telling you how people are going. Track LinkedIn. You can see where talent is moving, who's weak, and then pounce. Be thoughtful about going and get, you never want to do too many because it signals to your internal workforce that you may think that they're not good enough.
Right. You don't want to think that you're trading up, I suppose.
But surgical acquisition of talent, particularly from competitors, wonderful, right? And it really, it sets some mood music alive in the market. Oh, they're doing something interesting. So I would say proactive on the offense, but clean up your game, in terms of what's on offer.
And when you do bring those, say you are able to bring some of those people in from outside, you're then of course faced with that challenge we talked about, which is how how do you onboard them,
Yeah.
in this environment? I mean, if it's tough
Yeah.
enough to sort of ensure that people who've worked for you for a while retain culture, retain that allegiance, and you
100%.
vice versa, how do you do it for someone who has no
Yeah,
experience
and
with the
even they're going
company?
to need some renewal, right? I mean, it's easy to forget now, but prior to the pandemic, some of the largest really remote workforces were being called back
Mhm, mhm.
because they'd run through the series of people who grew up in the place and had the social ties,
Yeah.
rolling on the ones that aren't, like it was kind of falling apart.
Mhm, mhm,
So, it wouldn't be surprised me if people said, hey, your first year with us, your first 9 months,
mhm.
it's going to be all on site with a
Okay.
really structured period of onboarding and
Mhm,
working your way through some different experiences to learn people. That wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if the thing we were talking about before, like you have a day, you have a day a month for the company, 2 days. I think it's a way of constantly reinforcing why we exist, what we're doing, celebration. When I was a young associate, I joined McKinsey into London, and it was right at the end of the .com thing. So we still was halcyon days, and we
mhm,
couldn't all fit into number one German Street. And so Ian Davis, who became the MD of
mhm,
McKinsey, was our office manager.
mhm,
And when he wanted to have a meeting, we would rent out Cafe Royale and
mhm,
we'd go across the street and we'd go in.
mhm,
It was an event. It was special, right? And I do think there's something about the specialness of getting together, right?
mhm,
To celebrate what's going on, to hear what's coming next.
mhm.
It should still matter, right? I mean, look, I'm not saying there aren't boondoggles and there are things where people are like it's largesse and you wonder why you're doing it. But I mean, a real like it matters for us to be together ought to be a thing again in my
Mhm,
mind.
mhm. I'm actually curious. I mean, you did a lot of international work. I mean, are you seeing a different picture globally versus what you might be seeing here in the U.S. just in terms of how companies outside the U.S. are dealing with this versus the U.S.?
Yeah, a few, a
Mhm.
few. Clearly, I'm concentrated in the Western Europe and North
Right.
America
Mhm.
stuff right now. A lot of it is still driven by how much progress we've made on the pandemic.
Okay.
Right? I
Mhm.
mean, my colleagues last year in India were truly in the throes of a devastating existential public health crisis.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? That's really all
Mhm.
that mattered, at
Mhm.
that point. So I
Mhm.
do think you have to have the lives part at least moderately under control to begin to talk about the livelihoods.
Mhm.
But I do think you start getting into something on the tight and loose cultures where the culture is more or less open to being told what to do
Mhm.
and how that impacts things like vaccination rates,
Mhm.
masking rules, adoption of those techniques. That's clearly very different, right? And
Mhm.
the extent to which they would accept the boss saying, we're coming back on this day
Right.
versus people feel like, no, 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 I got choice and I'm not choosing you if you keep going down that road.
Mhm.
And so,
Mhm.
but now the more open the culture is, and let's say, more unlikely they are to take the rules, it does present very interesting challenges because you say you can go anywhere for talent,
Mhm.
but then what? I mean, just think about something as simple like taxation.
Sure.
If you don't have a license to operate in that state and suddenly a whole bunch of people move there,
Mhm.
well, now what do you
Mhm.
do? Are you in violation of not paying tax to that state,
Right.
right? I mean, there's that gig. There's the whole part of like when you demand people come and plug back into the hive. I mean,
Mhm.
look, I think in general, you have to say to yourself, is this a critical skill pool that
Mhm.
we're so struggling to compete with that we
Mhm.
need to really open it up? Or
Mhm.
the kind of work that demands fast pace, hyper cycle, people need to be together, and doing it and just make it really attractive to come here.
Right.
I think you have to decide which, knowing,
Mhm.
however, that you're swimming upstream if you insist on bringing people to you. Because you have a
Right.
lot of people saying, I'm solving for where I want to live first and then picking a job, not
Mhm.
vice versa. And just 10 years ago, that would have been different. Even 5 years ago, you would have had a lot more people still doing the grass widow thing. Family stays put, and maybe you travel Monday morning to Thursday night.
Right. Are you seeing, I'm curious, one thing we've seen with in terms of people moving, there's that thing I think it's called the donut effect, where you've had a fair number of people move out of central cities, expensive. They're not necessarily moving to Idaho or wherever. They're often going to the suburbs nearby. If I'm in New York, it might be Westchester, it might be New Jersey. Are you seeing clients being to adapt to that, being like, well, maybe we need to put offices or some kind of working space in those areas, as opposed to saying everyone who is going to come in is going to come into that, downtown, midtown, central city environment?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, it's a great question. And I often say, could we just work our way through what are we trying to be close to?
Mhm.
We're trying to be close to customers,
Right.
close to talent, close to critical resources or mineral resources, close to
Mhm.
competitors, or close to
Mhm.
people in our ecosystem.
Mhm.
I mean, Silicon Valley didn't happen overnight.
Right.
The triangle didn't happen overnight. The area around Boston didn't happen overnight. Pittsburgh didn't happen overnight,
No.
right? People
Mhm.
go, "Ooh, hold on. There's a school or two. There's a couple of our competitors. There's, hey, the wafer people are next to the semiconductor people. Okay, let's do that. So you started finding constellations, that build up. And then very quickly, as soon as you had employment opportunity, healthcare, education, housing, right?
Yep.
That's because you had to be where the work is. So many people are rethinking, in particular, the multiple they have to pay. Like, are you going to pay the New York multiple when no one actually wants to be there?
Yeah.
Right? You know what I mean? Or people trying to do the arbitrage of, no, I want you to keep paying me the New York multiple, but I want to live in Connecticut.
Right. Yeah.
I also think there's a fairness thing here, which is if you want the degrees of freedom to live wherever, then you take the multiple away, and you go back to the base. You go back to the base salary.
Although, does that risk, doing that at this particular moment when you're having a lot of turnover, is that a little risky that you might become less competitive?
Maybe. I think it's at a minimum, it's worth saying, does our economic model support that as a locked-in base rate? An interesting parallel is the Department of Defense, the military. Whether it's it's the GS or even those in the military, you have a base salary, right? But then if you're in a role that's in an MOS they need, you get a kicker. If you're in theater, you get a kicker. If you're hazard pay, you get a kicker. If you're in a particular command unit, maybe there's a kicker for the period of time you're doing it, whatever. But if you go out of those roles, you lose the kickers that are assigned to that role. Right? When you deployed in Korea or you deployed at Ramstein, it's not the same as you deployed at McGuire.
Right. Clearly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, why wouldn't we have that? Right? Why wouldn't you say, okay, let's talk about where the work is. And if your work is, I don't have to go where work is, you send the work to me. Okay, great. I do think there'll be an interesting pivot point, a couple months, maybe a couple years on, where people feel like, are they as attached as they want to be with the level of interaction they have? Or does it start feeling incredibly remote, incredibly transactional, almost like we've backed our way into the gig economy without even trying? And I worry for institutions on that front. Long ago when I thought I was going to be an academic and I was finishing my dissertation, it was on why would employees go above and beyond at work, the idea of the exchange relationships. So much of that is about the exchange. It's about this stuff, back and forth, the gets and the gets. I really worry that we will have places that will become largely economic exchange, largely task-based, if they don't invest in and really inculcate this idea that there's something bigger than us here, which is why we started with purpose, and I would go back to purpose, which is we're part of something bigger and more important. And I think, it's like, I used to go to refineries. I did a lot of work in refineries and power plants, and I'd go to the place they eat across the street, and I would just sit and keep tallies of people who come out, whether or not they take their badge off. If they kept their badge on, they loved working for that place. If they took the badge off and put it in their pocket, they were maybe feeling a little squeamish. Tells you a lot, right? This idea of pride in one's institution, pride in belonging. Do you bleed the badge colors? You get a lot of extraordinary effort for that. If it's just transactional, maybe not.
You're not going to get that. You're not going to get that extraordinary effort.
I think so.
Something you mentioned, you talked about your earlier part of your career. Being mentored on a sort of person-by-person basis. That's a good question. Like how can someone be a good mentor to a younger worker in this kind of environment? Because that is key, and that's what they need. But communicating that might not. There's no playbook for that right now, I feel like.
No. It probably requires more effort than managers are used to.
Okay.
I find, like, after meetings, I'm desperately trying to get my assistant to understand that a 50-minute meeting is better than 60.
Right.
25 and 30. Beyond the obvious need for bio breaks, you also do need, like, real-time feedback. So, like, I have a young woman I work with who's incredible. She's definitely going to be a partner of the firm. But we always very quickly debrief after every client meeting, right? Back and forth, how to go, and not one way, both ways, right? How to go, and more punctuated and formalized stock taking maybe once a fortnight.
Okay.
Kind of thing, just to try to get a sense. I just think it requires more purposeful effort. But, it's certainly something we knew how to do. It used to be that feedback and apprenticeship was a more natural part of the managerial experience. And over time, we've allowed it to creep into just like the semi-annual review form and the annual review form. And this part of, like, the manager and performance management should involve this give and take, because it shows the person you're investing in them. And I feel like it's going to require a return to that, honestly.
I want to bring in one question from the audience here, and this is asking about McKinsey's research on the Great Resignation or the Great Attrition. What industries and roles are getting hit the worst that you find, and are you? I assume you're working with them, but are you giving them advice on that? Yeah.
Good question. I saw that one too, so I conveniently reached for those pages. On the top end, leisure and hospitality,
Yeah.
When we're asking people likely to leave in the next 6 months, they're at 47, goods producing 43, white collar 41, trade, transportation, utilities 38, education 32. Education on the lower end, but even just think about that. What education institution do you know that can afford to lose a third of the workforce in the next 6 months?
How many? No.
Right? Whereas leisure and hospitality pushing up towards 50. I mean, the thing that surprised me was they are all at risk. Remember how I told you when we talked to people who already left, 36% of them didn't have a job? When we asked the same ones here who are saying they're likely to leave, what percentage you would leave without a job in hand? 64%.
Wow.
This is going to get worse because if you don't change the work when people leave, you have the same amount of work done by a smaller number of people. It's a negative derivative and you just start swirling because you're asking a smaller number of people to do the same work. Yeah. The break here, I think, is looking at the work, taking out all the nonsense or arbitrary work, redoubling on re-recruiting every person you have, and being incredibly thoughtful about what the interaction model is.
It sounds like you almost had to start from the ground up with this, especially with something like hospitality that, that's, you have to be a person possibly. It's been very high pressure, very high stress.
Yeah.
Often the pay not be great. That sounds like you need a fundamental rethinking of that if you're not going to.
I think so. I do. And, at the risk of, just because it's election day here in Pennsylvania, at the risk of not wading into that, I do think we have to look at the economic model.
Okay.
And fundamentally understand to what extent is this a non-sustainable economic model because it's been on the back of wages of workers who are now saying to you, I will not work for that.
Right.
Right. And you say, okay, well, we have to pass it through the customers. Well, so be it. At what point did we sign that everything needed to be cheap? I'm not trying to be dismissive about it, right? Small businesses and small and medium enterprises are a huge portion of the American experience. I'm not dismissing any of that. I'm just saying the workers are letting the employers know the power dynamic has shifted. And at a minimum, you're going to meet us here where we can actually talk about it. I'm not betrothed to this. And I think many of us were unprepared for that. I mean, it would not surprise me at all. Clearly, I'm not a soothsayer. But it wouldn't surprise me if we see a rise in collective bargaining units again that we haven't seen since the 1960s.
Well, we're already seeing, what was it, Striketober last month? Yeah.
We were at an all-time low. Yeah, Striketober, no kidding. We were at an all-time low before the pandemic. It wouldn't surprise me at all if we came back, including return the guilds. And if I were companies, this is the thing I would worry about. Where we haven't really gotten our head around credentialing or training or the ongoing investment in lifetime employability. Guilds could very easily fill a void that says, we will always send you someone who's qualified for what you need, like IBEW and electricians, apprentice, master tech, or whatever. What if they said, hey, we're going to do that, like SEICU, the healthcare workers, going with Western governors. We're already seeing this stuff where the unions could go back but fill more of a role at guild and go, no, don't worry, the company. Come to us, come to the bench. We'll keep a bench of people who are always trained up. That to me would be a disintermediation that if I were the organization, I'd be very concerned about. Right?
What can they do about that? Does that say reach out to those groups and begin to forge relationships just in case? Or is that something that
I think you've just given up your seat at the table to shaping standards and shaping what's necessary by not going to the schools, by not going upstream, by not revisiting the knowledge, skills, and attributes and experiences that you have to have, by taking DE&I seriously, not just viewing it as a check account for EEOC, but actually looking at what you open the experience up to and really being thoughtful about equity. That to me, you want a better voice, better seat, be a better partner.
Right.
And it's again, I've said nothing about writing a check. It's about the experience, about why it matters, about giving people a chance that if it doesn't work here, it might work somewhere else.
So another question from the audience here. A lot of people, they say, seem to be really exasperated with their managers. I can understand that. Where do you think they're failing? And this is the managers, I assume. And from their POV, the manager's POV, why is their job harder, I suppose?
Where to start? Well, so listen, I have a lot of sympathy for the current manager, who I go out at great lengths, often regularly, to complain about and say, get better. We've been studying the whole future work thing for going on 2.5 years now. And we're writing a book about the unique role of people leaders, or let's say middle managers more broadly defined, across work, workforce, and workplace. We need someone to figure out what work should happen, what work should change, what work should stop. We need someone to really understand the skills required and what people can do. And we really need someone to help create a place that people want to join and remain part of, also called the people they work for, managers. But what have we done to that group of people? So I'm 52, right? I grew up here in the Lehigh Valley. I watched Bethel Steel shut, Mack trucks go away,
Yeah.
Lucent go away, right? And so that, just in my own backyard, what used to be like, oh, they were a middle manager at Bethlehem Steel. That was a wonderful position. We've derided these roles.
Mhm.
Been an onslaught of downsizing, re-engineering, and outsourcing for 40 years.
Mhm.
Right? We packed these roles full of administrivia, increased their spans so they couldn't possibly coach to anyone but the worst employees,
Mhm.
and hand them all the stuff to deal with that has everything that makes sure they don't deal with the employees.
Right.
So in many cases, we've promoted, raised, and groomed bureaucrats that are overwhelmed with feeding the beast
Mhm.
and not actually leading anyone.
Mhm.
And so I think we've set them up, honestly. I think we've set them up for a really difficult time.
Mhm. I mean, it's
And
almost like
start there. I know I'd really start there, right in those roles.
yeah. I mean, it's almost like a supply chain issue where companies went just in time for years. There was a financial impetus. That's what investors demanded. Now, of course, suddenly you're left in a sudden shift, and you're kind of caught off guard. And I guess similarly with the sort of denigration of the middle manager's role. Oh, wait! Suddenly, you really actually need those people, and you can't just grow them out of nowhere, I suppose.
I mean, I think the parallel of squeezing working capital, getting rid of buffer stocks, making everything just in time, created this situation where we were tuned to one condition with almost no resilience, right, to it. And we've done almost the same thing with time. Almost the same thing. It's remarkable. I really worry that for a lot of folks, we're going to have to ease them towards the end of their career.
Okay.
We're probably going to have to redouble our efforts at bringing the leadership back into it. And we're probably going to have to look at accepting that the fixed cost base of the structure needs to increase, because we might just need to lower the span for people to have a chance to actually do some coaching.
Another question was how the distributed work areas change the game specifically for management consultants like yourself. I mean, how is your job? I mean, you mentioned a little bit changed around travel, things like that, but how do your job, especially client facing, do you think it's going to be different in the future?
Yeah, great question. I am embarrassed to admit that if you'd have asked me last March, 2 March, I would have told you that I was deeply concerned for the firm and for professional services, period. And that I was just convinced it couldn't happen if we weren't face to face. That has proven to be unbelievably wrong.
Right.
I mean, it has been an incredibly robust period of opportunity to really help our clients in a real moment of need. And do I think the places where we already have relationships, we've been able to leverage that? Sure, for sure, because there's trust there. But even that, I mean, some of it is unnecessary meetings get tossed out. You tend to get down to the essence of what the work is pretty quickly, and the teams have figured it out. I think our teams on the ground executing the work, probably haven't had as good an experience. Probably not, because they're isolated. They're not there's a buzz to the team room, the problem solving part of it. That's wonderful from an apprenticeship and experience standpoint. We've not been able to offer that. That's the disappointing part. I also think the client team members, same thing. They've not really, very rarely are they released from their day job. So it's like their day job plus the McKinsey work and how do they handle it. Right. In terms of opportunities for really having really impactful change, really changing the trajectory of these places, I think that's probably increased.
Right. So, I mean, it does seem as if in the future, that's going to be even more important. I mean, you're going to need people like you, frankly, because we just talked about how we're missing that sort of that middle layer of management. I mean, someone's going to come in who has that expertise.
Well, there's no shortage that we have some undoing to do, huh? No doubt. But I don't think this model is sustainable in an absolute sense. I think we likely need some more thoughtful balance. Like, we likely got to the point where we were dismissing people's time in a sense that we just assumed they'll fly anywhere at any moment's notice. Right. Okay, I think that was too far. But there's still times where it's a good reason to go and be face to face, and I think we should return to some of that. I mean, look, I'm willing to subject myself to a whole lot of, tests just to go spend a day with someone. So I'm thinking that's probably a good bar. Are you willing to endure that? On both ends?
How far? Yes, exactly. You mentioned about one thing on the, like, maybe some people have to be eased out towards the end of their career. We are also seeing accelerated retirements as well too. Yes. And a lot of reasons for that. I think some of it stock market related, some of it just more of a personal risk situation. But what's the risk on that? I mean, if you're losing your most experienced people at the same time, I can see a downside to that too, Billy.
Oh yeah, very
Yeah.
much so. Now, the good news is we've had some experience with this over, let's say, the last 15 years, because particularly in STEM intense industries, the run up of people being hired in the 70s when there was still a massive boom in the
Oh, right.
industrial base of America, right? So we have some experience, but you're right to raise this. For sure, the run up in the market and the not being able to spend anything for like 15 months, it meant
Mhm.
that actually a lot of people could get to the point where they could both retire early and defer
Mhm.
Social Security until close to the 70s. Probably not a terrible thing from a sense of people feeling agency and choice.
Mhm.
But if you change the value proposition and said to people, actually, you're really important to us because you know a lot. How about if we lower the threshold for benefits from 30 hours to 20
Mhm.
and we
Okay.
deploy you differently? In
Mhm.
some respects, you wouldn't even have to play the money game. It is just about your benefits particularly if your benefits are better than what they can get on the exchange,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
offer it, right? So we don't have to watch all these people leave. We
Mhm.
can just be more thoughtful about how we lose them, how we use them, not just lose them.
Mhm. Mhm. Another question for the audience, and this is kind of a general one. I think that we talked a lot. Is you talk about a sense of purpose is what workers want. How do you advise companies to really put that out there? Okay, do you just declare here's our purpose, and if they they may not have a purpose or at least not have a stated one, how do they discover that? Is there a process to figure out like what are we all doing here, and how do we make that clear to our employees in a way that binds them a little tighter to the team?
Yeah. Well, look, one of the things is the company has to know, other
Yeah.
than we're
Right.
here because we're here.
Right.
Um, you know, CEOs have some really unique questions that they alone can answer.
Mhm.
Why we exist, and how we're going to make money, and
Mhm.
how we want to run the place. Those three are really kind of uniquely CEO questions. Now, they can, of course, engage their team on it. They can engage the board on it, depending if they're chairman or CEO, but almost existential kind of company questions. Why do
Mhm.
we have a right to exist? What role do we fill? If you can almost redouble your efforts on confirming that and saying, is this enough anymore? Does it need to
Okay.
be more than that? We were doing corporate purpose stuff a little while ago when the business roundtable came up and they were talking in
Mhm.
return to multi-stakeholder and said, is this just a re-importance of ESG,
Mhm.
or is it something more than that? And I'd always hoped that it'd be something more than that. Where an organization could say, does everything we do have to be good,
Mhm.
or do we have to be really good so we can do good? And
Mhm.
meaning like you throw off a ton of cash and your foundation has it, a la like Walmart to the Walmart Foundation,
Sure.
or does every single thing you have to do be good,
Mhm.
like a B Corp, like a
Sure.
Patagonia or something else?
Mhm.
As long as the rules around capital allocation are such, and you have an obligation to people who give you capital, it
Mhm.
might be very difficult to land. Everything we do has to be good,
Right.
right? And I'm
Mhm.
not saying not illegal. I'm saying good, as in good for
Yeah,
everyone.
there's a difference in those two things. Yeah, clearly.
Very big difference, right?
Mhm.
Just think about this. If you say everything has to be good,
Mhm.
that could go down the road of who do we take capital from? What do we
Right.
make? Where do we
Mhm.
make it? What
Mhm.
techniques do we use to make it? How
Mhm.
much do we exert our pricing power? Whom do
Mhm.
we sell to? How do we think about marketing? Right? I
Mhm.
mean, you work your way through. Many of us will have Apple devices, and I'm not picking on Apple. Many people choose to move production, in the parts of Asia where they can play a labor arbitrage,
Sure.
right?
Of course.
Down to design, really. What if you said, well, what about all the people who used to make those? Why haven't we brought those jobs back to America? Is it
Mhm.
is it a parochial sense? Is it a nationalistic sense? Who's
Mhm.
the good we're doing for? I mean, those are meaty, meaningful questions that some organizations have just stayed silent on, versus
Mhm.
others said this is an opportunity for us to enhance our brand first as a company, as an entity,
Mhm.
and then as an employer.
Mhm.
So I think at a minimum, it's just worthwhile taking a pause and going, no kidding, it doesn't just require a retreat to Tahoe. We have to
Right.
get really clear on why we exist
Mhm.
and what
Mhm.
our rules of conduct are. And if it's only a legalistic framework
Mhm.
and you're still by and large chasing the shareholder owned primacy perspective,
Mhm.
that may not be wrong, but it also may not be right going forward,
Right.
particularly in
Mhm.
terms of your employer brand, where increasingly you're seeing people say, I'm not participating if that's the only thing you're optimizing for.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you do risk losing something. I mean, there might be perfectly good reasons for doing
Yeah.
that, but
If you make
you
one
put
of the
yourself
if
at a
you make one of the
disadvantage.
five prime, the other four might send you a message.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned CEOs. I'm just, I'm curious. Look, no one's feeling sorry for them, but at the same time, who, not that who is doing this well, but what are the sort of characteristics you've seen from CEOs that actually seem to be managing this fairly well, whether in terms of retention or just in terms of navigating all the vagaries of the pandemic and the hybrid era that we're talking about right now?
Boy, it's really easier to describe the ones that aren't doing it well.
So, yeah. Right.
Almost always tend to view things with a lack of humility, view things yesterday's power dynamic, and view things really in terms of, okay, even the ones that were good in the moment, in the crisis up front. Okay, are we done with this now? Can we move, like an impatience, right? Because they want to return to what they know. So for sure, accepting that you probably don't have a roadmap. Most of us in our working lives have never seen anything like this, not within this duration. Many of us will have seen a natural disaster or a hurricane or forest fires or something else. I don't think any of us have gone through something that lasted this long.
Right. This is very different.
It's a prolonged sense of grief and loss, with this intermittent sense of foreboding that this new thing that's coming is actually the thing that's going to really kill your loved one, right? Which for many people just was not going away, right? The ones doing it well, I think the ones that are using it as an opportunity to reground on what's the point of belonging, whom they serve, accepting that the power dynamic has shifted underneath them in a way that they probably couldn't have accepted. I mean, the power dynamic between employees and employer, it's a pretty big deal. The power dynamic between customers and companies in many cases changed significantly over the last couple of years. I also think they've learned quite a bit in how to serve. Who would have ever guessed that Best Buy and the retailers can convert 50% of their footprint to forward deployed logistics centers, and people go, no, I don't need to come in. Just throw it in the back of my car. Who would have guessed that? Right? I mean, that's so, McDonald's and other fast food places being able to accelerate the rollout of kiosks. I mean, there was a lot of things that COVID presented as an opportunity to bring forward. I'm sure some of them aren't going to stick forever. I think we're going to see a real split, particularly in consumption experiences. If I go to a fine restaurant, I actually want the person who knows wine to come and talk to me. I don't want to flip through the iPad.
Yeah.
I'd like not to.
I've already gone above and beyond by leaving my house. Step one. So yeah, you want that.
I'd like the experience, and the experience, and for me, I don't want to do the electronic version. So I think we're figuring some of that out. I think the best CEOs have understood that for partners in their ecosystem who are facing real problems in supply chain, what employees are looking for, what customers want from an experience, and what they'll tolerate. Each of those constituencies, we're having a bit of an evolving give and take about where we're settling in at. And I think the ones that get it best acknowledge that they alone don't have the power, that it is an exchange,
I think we have time for one last question. Then this is something I've been asking everyone about. Okay, so we all heard about the metaverse now after the last week and Facebook, or now Meta. There's a vision here where we can begin to migrate some of this work into not just this video two-dimensional experience, but actually we're all going to be in virtual reality offices. Just curious, what do you think of that? When that's out there, does that make you run away, or does that make you intrigued?
I find that very worrying. I will tell you that I thought the announcement of Meta, I thought it was like a connection to What If, and it was just the next.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Next multiverse, right?
Yeah, right.
No, honestly, I have there's so many wonderful things that you can see for uses of like AR and VR. I'm not sure I need to be interacting with avatars of the people I want to interact with. I think while I still can, I'd probably like to interact with people.
Yeah, I can imagine. Plus, I don't really personally want to be wearing goggles all day long and stuff, not just staring at a screen.
When somebody tells me that they can land an airplane better by being able to look down and see through the floor and see the runway, I go, that's great. Somebody tells me a surgeon has all sorts of interesting panels of diagnostic material while they're doing, robot enhanced surgery. Great. Interacting like this, but I get your avatar, not my avatar. No, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. Well, I think that's just about all for us now. And I thank you so much for taking the time to talk, Bill. And, good luck. I know you're a big Auburn fan. Good luck in the Iron Bowl coming up this weekend, right?
No, well, a little bit yet, right? But yeah, I'm feeling cautiously optimistic.
Cautiously optimistic. Okay. Well, that's the best you can hope for. And I appreciate it. And, we'll go back over to Steve now. Thank you.
Thank you. This was fun. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks to you, Bill and Bryan. And that was a really great conversation, a kind of a tour of the horizon with really good binoculars. Thanks to our knowledge partner, McKinsey Company, and to all of you for participating today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromday1.co, and check out more of our upcoming webinars. I'll mention a couple. This Thursday, November 4th, we'll be talking about addressing power, privilege, and racial equity in your organization. Following Tuesday, November 9th, we'll be shining a light on the early career path in your company. And Thursday, November 11th, inclusion and intersectionality, our CSR's biggest opportunity. So thanks, everyone. Stay well.